Good evening. I'm Dr. Andrew Shryock, and I'm a musicologist here at the Boston Conservatory, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to say a few words about the program this evening. Any opportunity, really, to talk about Johann Sebastian Bach is not one to be missed, even if it means that I had to dig into the back of my closet and find my galoshes once again. But tonight, two masterworks. First, Sebastian Bach's 15 Inventions, a collection of pieces which stand at the center of the Baroque repertoire for a number of reasons. And then in the second half, one of the great string quintets, that is 4 string players, your traditional string quartet, 2 violins, viola, and cello, plus all of the potency and force of the piano. The Sebastian Bach piece, the 15 Inventions, is a work that has humble beginnings. It's a work which was composed toward the end of the 17 teens into the beginning of the 1720s by Johann Sebastian Bach, and it was really intended as a didactic tool. It was intended as a collection of music that was meant to educate the performer. To educate the performer in 2 ways. Specifically, this collection of pieces was meant for Bach's eldest son, Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, who was born in 1710. And when he comes of age to take up the family craft, the family profession, his father, Johann Sebastian Bach, prepares for him a collection of pieces which are meant to introduce him not only to playing, but also to, and this we often forget when it comes to the 15 Inventions, also to composition. But at the title page, Bach reminds us of this dual purpose. He says, this is what he says on the title page, he says, "These 15 Inventions are straightforward instruction in which amateurs of the keyboard, and especially the eager ones, are shown a clear way not only of learning to play cleanly in 2 voices, but also all the while acquiring a strong foretaste of composition." And so I think if we listen to these pieces with that sort of dual objective in mind, we can hear some of what Johann Sebastian Bach intended. So first off, the playing, very straightforward introduction to the keyboard. Right at the outset, we have a piece which requires the right hand to use all the fingers, one right after the other, followed by leaps, followed by crossing underneath the fingers in a very sort of elementary way. This is the first piece that Wilhelm Friedemann would have encountered in his musical instruction. It sounds like this. I think many people will know it. Seats. This piece is so fundamental to the piano student even today. These works are fundamental to the composition student as well, however. We have to remember what Bach tells us. These are works for composition as well as for playing. And we move to invention number 8 to hear that. Invention number 8 is an F major, and it opens with an F major chord in the right hand and then in the left hand. But this piece is also well known for a little trick that Bach allows for. I turn here, profile, to show you. We begin with the right hand and then move to the left hand, but this is a piece which actually allows for the left hand to take its material, cross over into left hand territory. The left hand does exactly the same, comes up into right hand territory, and you can actually play the piece like this, and the counterpoint sounds exactly in the Sebastian Bach 18th century contrapuntal style. All of the strict rules of counterpoint are followed. I have this for you. You can hear both versions. One with the hands as notated in the score, and the other, I'll use a technical term here, forgive me, with a switcheroo. question begs, however, why do we still listen to, why do we still perform, why do we still put on our galoshes on an April Friday night and go out and hear performances of this work these works were intended for a 10-year-old German boy who, if he were alive today, would be more than 300 years old. Why do we still perform and listen to this stuff? The Inventions, it turns out, are models of craftsmanship as well. They're models of craftsmanship, each and every one beginning with clarity and accessibility, but then giving way to textural density and to rhythmic energy that results in the climax of each of these pieces. And that's what I'd like you to listen for, to trace that accessibility transforming into dramatic intensity over the course of each invention. You'll have 15 chances to try and hear that in these works. I'm going to play my favorite. My favorite comes early in the collection. It's number 2, and it opens with such an expressive melody, which is imitated by the left hand, but first presented in the left hand, but first presented in the right. Students, that stuff is so delicious you could put it on your breakfast cereal. We find similar richness in the Dvořák in the second half of the program, the string quintet, and in the Dvořák we find a complex blend, a nexus, if you will, a confluence of a wide variety of historical and musical and geographic influences, all infused into a single four-movement composition. The first characteristic that I want to call to your attention is that four-movement structure. It is a structure that would have been familiar not only to Dvořák, but to his predecessors as well, going back all the way to the previous century, 125 years earlier, to the early works of Haydn, for example, the early works of Beethoven. This four-movement structure was conventional. The two outer works, the bookends, movements 1 and 4, are demonstrations of the most complex musical architecture known in the 19th century. It's known as sonata form. In the middle, meanwhile, the composer demonstrates his ability to compose in a wide variety of styles. We generally expect to encounter a movement which imitates vocal music. We'll hear that in the Dvořák is really this sort of cornerstone of the composition, this beautiful cantabile singing style movement, which is by far the longest movement of the quintet. And then we also have the imitation of dance music, where the cantabile sets the voice in motion, the figurative voice. The third movement sets the figurative body in motion, the imitation of dance music. We'll hear that as well. What we also hear are more direct references in this composition. In the in the Dvořák quintet, Dvořák nods, as it were, to the father of the piano quintet. That is Robert Schumann, who about 40 years earlier had experimented and explored with the string quartet by adding a piano. The piece which he composed in 1840 was so successful that composers after him continued to follow in this new mold, this new genre. And what we see Dvořák doing is nodding in homage to the innovator, to the founder of the piano quintet. And the way that he does that is in the fourth movement, by having just a short little fugato section, which sounds very similar to a short fugal section in the Schumann piece. See if you can't hear both fugues. First, the Schumann. Simply imitation, that's what fugue is. Here comes our second voice. Hear that? Hear that imitation? There it is one more time. Dvořák will give us a very similar sort of texture in the middle of his fourth movement as well. Have a listen. This is Dvořák effectively showing his indebtedness, acknowledging the compositions of his forebears and masters. He does the same sort of thing, nodding to his influences elsewhere throughout the work and in a slightly different type of capacity. Dvořák is perhaps the best known of the Czech composers of the 19th century. He's Bohemian by birth. This is in the sort of western part of what is now the Czech Republic, and he nods to those roots throughout the piece as well. And the way that he does that is by using a non-Western scale. A Western scale is the one that you find in The Sound of Music. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But Dvořák uses a new scale, not with 7 notes, but with 5. Do, re, mi, sol, la, do, la, sol, mi, re, do. It takes away 2 of those notes and gives it a slightly alien feeling. We hear it in some settings as the sound of American music. This is Dvořák's Symphony from the New World. The English horn in the second movement of Dvořák's Symphony No. 9, written just a few years later, but here is a 5-note scale in the material we'll hear tonight. Some musical opinions are subjective. This one is not. That is some of the most gut-wrenching, beautiful music you can imagine. It turns out I'm not the only one that thinks that. In a review of the earliest performance of this work, this is what one reviewer had to say. It is one of the finest and at the same time one of the most beautiful and attractive works of its composer. Its principal characteristic is the strong national coloring which pervades it throughout. The first and last movements are models of form as well as of originality, and the third movement, which we just listened to, the scherzo, or furiant as the composer calls it, is simply irresistible in its surging energy and freshness. I hope you have a similar experience tonight. Thanks very much.